Good morning, scholars. Today we're going to continue our march through Farr's Homeric Greek, beginning Lesson 5, which will be broken up into two parts because we're starting in on the verbs, and the first part will give us a big picture of Greek verbs, and the second part will actually get us into the nitty-gritty of the present indicative active of luo. Okay. So, as an English speaker, the odd or seemingly odd thing that you have to get used to dealing with Greek or Latin is the notion of number and person and number of finite verbs. Okay, and John Wright, in the third edition of Farr, he added this explanation at the beginning of the chapter, which earlier readers of Farr would not probably have needed because they would have already studied Latin. However that may be, here we go. Wright writes, like Greek nouns, Greek verbs change their forms to indicate their function in a sentence. To a certain extent, English verbs do so as well. For example, we say, I go, but he goes. The Greek verb employs different endings for the first person, the speaker I, or in the plural we, the second person, the one addressed, you, or in the plural you all, and the third person, the person spoken about, he, she, it, or they. In the singular, and it has singular, dual, and plural. Okay. The personal pronouns I, you, he, she, it are seldom employed. They seldom actually appear unless special emphasis is desired. Hence, the verb endings must be thoroughly memorized in order to understand a Greek sentence. The present tense is used to describe an action taking place in present time. The meaning of the terms active and indicative will be explained in later lessons. Okay. So, just down and dirty are endings for the persons and numbers. The first person singular I will be signaled by the ending omega, O. The second person singular you by the ending ace, epsilon, iota, sigma. The third person singular he, she, it by epsilon, iota, a. And in the plural, we, the first person, amen, you all, ete, and they, use, from ante, if you want to get down and dirty about how use actually comes to be, check out Smyth 115a and 37. I highly recommend that because it goes a long way in understanding this third plural. Okay. So, o, ace, a, amen, ete, use. And you would do yourself good to copy out these 6 forms schematically, let's say 20 times, just to get them, start to get them cut into your brain. Okay? So, now this is a statement from a wonderful old school philological text from 1850. Donaldson's New Credulous, where he explains basically why Greek verbs are so complicated. And I found this passage very enlightening when I came up on it very late in my Greek studies, but it explains something that the difference between Greek and English, which goes a long way in understanding just why Greek verbs are so complicated relative to English. Okay, he writes, when some verb in a finite tense is prefixed to some other verb in the infinitive, so that the two taken together form one notion, the combination is equivalent to a periphrasis of some tense. So he has the examples, you should go, we must go, I want to go, they will go. Okay? When this happens, we say that the finite verb, you should, we must, I want, they will, is used as an auxiliary. The verbs most frequently employed in this manner are those expressive of the condition or power of the agent, of his freedom from external hindrances, whether moral or physical, of his thoughts, intentions, will, or desire. That the employment of auxiliaries originated in the substitution of syntactical contrivances for the etymological inflections of the older language after these have fallen into disuse, okay, blah, 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 blah. This is the key idea, that you have these auxiliaries substitute for earlier etymological inflections, okay? In most of the languages of modern Europe, the system of auxiliaries has superseded all inflections of mood and tense. Okay, so in English we have would, should, must, will, these auxiliaries that announce certain aspects of tense or mood, which in Greek or Greek will, or Latin, but in Greek especially, will be built into the verb itself. Okay, so the fact of the matter, this boils down to the fact that English leans heavily on the use of auxiliaries, and these are not, which don't exist in Greek. So you don't have must to apply necessity, will, futurity, would, should, could. We don't have those in Greek to make our principal parts of verbs easy and as simple as they are in English. So this is why Greek verbs are so complicated, because Greek does not use auxiliaries, and we'll see what that means as we go forward. So Greek verbs are made up of various elements, and Farr tells us that there are two principal elements. There's the stem, okay, the stem. Then there's the ending. We saw the endings o, es, a, omen, ete, use, okay? And then there'll be suffixes between the stem and the ending that will determine, say, whether it's future or aorist past or other tenses and even moods. Now, for a fuller picture of these elements, the root is the central part of a word which remains after it has been analyzed into its various parts, and all the prefixes, suffixes, and formative elements have been removed. We talked about roots earlier, in an earlier lesson. A stem has often more than one form. Its different forms usually standing in ablaut relation to each other, and we'll talk about ablaut relation in a second. It is ordinarily derived from a root by the addition of various formative elements, prefixes, and suffixes. Okay? Some roots are also stems and are combined directly with inflectional elements. So this is just giving you a picture of, you have the stem, which can suffer ablaut variation, which we'll talk about in a second, and you have various prefixes and suffixes that can be added, and then you have endings. So you have all these internal elements that make a Greek verb very complicated, and I'll demonstrate this pretty soon. But first, let's just talk about this notion of Ablaut, which is, goes back to those German philologists of the 18th century or 19th century. Okay, in many words which are closely related, there occurs a change, sometimes even the disappearance of a vowel. So take, for example, in English, sing, sang, song, sung. I sing to my girl, I sang to my girl, I sang a song, I have sung to my girl. Okay, this variation between the I, the A, the O, and the U is known as Ablaut, the German term for vowel gradation. Okay, an Ablaut has strong grades and a weak grade, in the latter of which, in the weak grade, sometimes the vowel disappears altogether. So the most important grades are number 1, epsilon, omicron, or alpha. Number 2, long alpha, eta and homa, omicron, or alpha, etc., etc. And we'll come upon these as we see them. But note that 5 or 6 are really a part of 1, being the short vowels epsilon, omicron, combined with iota or upsilon, and forming the diphthongs a or oi. Okay, so the main point here, or the general thing that you can understand, is that the weak stem, the weak form of the vowel gradation will always just consist of one of the short vowels, and it will be lengthened one way or another, often by the addition of the u or e. But we'll see these strong and weak grades as we move forward. This is just to alert you of them. Okay? Now, so some examples. In English, like I say, we had sing, sang, sung, to sing. Okay, that's an example of Ablaut variation. But in Greek, for instance, in the verb to leave, like I left my book bag at school, we have leip, lip, loip as our variation in the present, the simple past, and the perfect respectively. And then in the verb to believe in Greek, we have peit, pit, poit. So you see that epsilon iota, simple iota, and omicron iota, this is a standard set of Ablaut variation, which you'll see in verbs, across verbs. And so it's good to be aware of, because it enables you to give some meaning to the madness, some method to the madness of Greek principal parts of verbs. Okay, so here we get into the nitty-gritty. The stem also often has more than one form. Its different forms usually stand in Ablaut relation to each other. It is ordinarily derived from a root by the addition of various formative elements, prefixes, and suffixes. Okay? Thus, a Greek verb can be compounded of as many as 7 different formative elements, constituting the etymological inflections that Donaldson talked about in that quote we read earlier, which are doing the work done in modern language by auxiliaries, must, shall, should, etc. So these elements, and I list them here, and this will be clear if we circle back to it in a while, but you have a thing called an augment, which marks a past tense, a reduplication, which remarks a perfect. You have a stem. You have a tense suffix that can be various tenses. You have a thematic vowel. You can have a mood suffix, which signals the optative or the subjunctive. And then finally, you have the personal endings, o, ace, a, amen, ete, use, if you're dealing with the primary tenses. So, for example, in Greek, you all might have released, okay, you all might have released, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words of English are expressed by a single word. Leleukoite. Leleukoite means you all might have released. So this is the complexity of the Greek verb. You have a reduplication, you have the stem, you have the tense suffix, you have the thematic vowel, you have the mood suffix, and you have the personal endings. And if you want to look more deeply into each of these elements, here are the sections in Smyth for you to explore as your leisure permits. Okay. So finally, starting with the present indicative, we have we're starting with λύειν, to release. So the thematic verbs are so named because in a majority of their forms, the personal ending is preceded by omicron or epsilon. Okay, omicron before mu and nu, or in the optative mode. Otherwise, epsilon, which is called the thematic vowel. So lu with this O/E, that's the way you mark this notion of a thematic variation between the Omicron and the epsilon. And this is called the theme to which the personal endings are attached. So you see, here we are with the present indicative of lύειν, to release, λύω, I release, λύες, you release, λύε, he, she, or it releases, λύομεν, we release, λύετε, you all release, λύουσε, they release. Okay, λύω, λύες, λύε, λύομεν, λύετε, λύουσε. Okay, again, I mean, the only way you're going to learn this is by writing it out numerous times and walking around repeating it to yourself until you can say it backwards and forwards with your eyes closed. Okay? Smyth, section 463D, explains the genesis of the third plural as λύουσε, and it's worth taking a look at. Okay. So, again, this is Smyth talking about the thematic vowel. Some tenses end in a vowel which varies between omicron and epsilon, or omega and eta in certain forms, like the subjunctive forms. This is called the thematic or variable vowel. Thus, λύομεν, λύετε, λύομεν, λύετε, λύσομεν, λύσετε. Those first two forms are present. The second two forms are subjunctives. The third two forms are futures. The thematic vowel, omicron, epsilon, or omega, eta, is written as λύωε or γραπώε, and you can see section 456 of Smyth for a little more information about that. Okay, omicron is used or appears before mu and nu in the indicative and in the optative. Omega occurs before mu and nu in the subjunctive. Elsewhere, epsilon is used in the indicative and eta in the subjunctive. So we'll learn all about the subjunctive further down the road. But this variation of thematic vowels and the notion of thematic vowel is just a very important one to understanding the way Greek verbs work. Okay, so that's the first part of lesson 5 of Farce Homeric Greek. Continue to study hard, and I'll talk to you soon.